This video is an opinion piece on why I believe Linux Mint is still one of the largest Linux distributions today, and why I strongly believe the Linux community at large is the reason behind why it is. That said, during this commentary I'll have some footage of me installing and setting up the latest version of Linux Mint, version 20, in the background. If we go back around 10 years ago, Linux Mint was the distribution that most people seem to recommend to anyone coming to Linux for the first time because it seemed to be the easiest at the time to pick up and just work. It also was designed to be very familiar to those coming from Windows at the time, which for many of us is what made it an obvious choice to recommend. And if you didn't catch what I just said there, it just worked. This is the biggest thing to note. The average user, not Linux user, but average computer user, they want to sit in front of a machine and just get work done, and not have to fiddle with anything to make it just work. And back then, that really was Linux Mint for the most part. It was one of the only distributions at the time that shipped and had all the codecs, which back then wasn't hard to install, but it had to be installed separately after the installation of the system was completed. While I know there were some legal debates about them shipping the codecs by default back then, that's really not the subject of this video. Linux Mint allowed anyone to just pick up and install the distribution and just start going right away. And the end user didn't have to be any of the wiser to get most things of anything else going. They took great effort to handpick a good selection of software that people would install on their systems. Their old software center had a really great recommendation section which their software center was custom and wasn't exactly like anyone else's back then. The recommendation section had just a list of all the different software. They had Wine, they had VirtualBox, they had just about any software your average user was going to look for right there in the recommended section. It wasn't the prettiest and it wasn't the most smooth, but it got people the software they were looking for and helped them get it installed, and that's all it needed to do. It didn't need to be pretty. With all these simple things like the practical software center, shipping with all the codecs you need, a good set of default applications, and even back then a less toxic community for the users on the Mint forums itself, because even back then a lot of people said just read the manual, which is not the thing to say to a new user. It just made it one of the stronger choices, and why so many people would tell anyone when they were looking to switch to Linux is just use Linux Mint. And by everyone doing that, myself included, that kind of sealed the deal with that. I just recently finished listening to one of my security podcasts I enjoy called Malicious Life, and I had one of the people who was working at Microsoft back when they were still trying to shove people off of XP, and they just finally decided to say, okay, fine, you want to keep having to use XP because you want us to keep supporting it because you won't move off? Fine, here's a crazy amount of money you had to pay to keep using it. And the response was, oh cool, great, no problem, we'll pay it. And they're like, wait, no, that's not what we want. And then said, fine, okay, well then the next year it's going to cost double that. And they're like, oh sweet, you saved us the time to fill out next year's, we'll just add it to the budget. And it just caused them to shake their heads like, oh crap, what'd we do? So what that tells us is people don't like change or adjusting to something different. It isn't a secret. It's heavily documented throughout history that we're averse to change, some more than others. However, this means we, and including myself in this, all told the Linux users back then, the new guys coming in, just use Linux Mint. And it's our own fault that we ended up on Linux Mint for the long haul for a lot of these people. They got comfortable with it. They grew to use it as their daily driver. It was already similar to the operating system they had used previously. And of course, at the time, it was the one that just worked. So, all this commentary, you might be thinking that I'm hating on Linux Mint. And that isn't the case. Today, it isn't one I immediately recommend to anyone. But I think a lot of people still actively use it because they have grown used to it. Remember, it has been more than 10 years ago that I was recommending this to people, and when I saw others doing it. Meaning that many of those people over these years have probably suggested it to others who would also suggest it to others, and so on and so forth. And when so many people have been recommended something, a lot of people are going to settle on it. Much like how people are settled into Windows or the Mac OS ecosystems. We're creatures of habit, and many of us will cling to what is comfortable to us. So why am I recording this opinion? Well, because many people in the Linux community as a whole love to distro hop, love to try new distros, play with the latest and greatest new toys and software, and it can often blind us to those who have come to Linux but don't share the same urge to tinker, jump around, and switch all the time. They want something stable, familiar, and not Windows. And this is how they ended up here. And we need to understand and respect that. I think a good way to take this opinion is the next time you recommend a Linux distribution to someone, maybe suggest a couple different options instead of just one. Because otherwise, they might not know to explore the other distributions out there and find one that they want to settle into until they settle into just the one that was recommended to them. But also remember, don't overwhelm people with options. Maybe give 2 or 3. And also respect other people's distribution choices. What works best for you may not work best for someone else for the same thing. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed my opinion piece on why Linux Mint, explaining how we as a community can affect those around us moving to our community, but don't partake in it like the majority of us do, and use it as a tool. We, like any other operating system, are the power users, tinkerers, enthusiasts, and we are the loud minority. Most users of any operating system use it as a tool to get work done, play their games, browse social media, and they don't really care about the rest as long as it just works. Anyways, I hope I was able to provide some food for thought, and if you liked the video, I'd love it if you could give it a like, and if not, there's always the thumbs down button too. And I want to get other videos, and if you want to get other videos like this, as well as the simple guides and tutorials, various other things while I'm still figuring out my channel, please go ahead and give me a subscription by clicking subscribe below. Thank you again, and enjoy the rest of your day.